The number one thing that gets in the way of fun is distraction, and therefore, one of the biggest blockers of fun is our phones. If you cut back on phone time, it's not just arbitrary restriction. It's not just to cut back on phone time to cut back on phone time. It's so that you have more time to live your life. How can you find ways to laugh? How can you find more ways to just be connected with people around you? The fact that a lot of tech leaders don't let their own kids use their products, to me, that was like, wow, the reason these apps are free is that you're being sold. And we never established etiquette around where it was appropriate to use phones. We never kind of stopped to think about what role we wanted them to play in our lives. We just never stopped to think. Telling a kid, actually, what you really should be prioritizing is having more fun and being more free and independent and spending more time with your friends. Like, that's a pretty compelling message for anyone. Fun can do so much to erase differences and bring us closer to people and keep us present in the moment. We just need to go on what we know as human beings, and these things are sucking our humanity away.
Today, I am thrilled to welcome Catherine Price, a health and science writer, speaker, and the author behind one of the most talked about books on digital well-being. It's called How to Break Up with Your Phone. And she's the co-author with Jonathan Haidt of the upcoming book, The Amazing Generation, which is a book that's aimed at young people, helping young people live a happy and exciting life that's not hijacked by smartphones. So Catherine, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
It's wonderful. And so I want to start with a quote that is, I believe, from How to Break Up Your Phone, which is, if our smartphones excess at one thing, it's making sure we never, ever have to be alone with ourselves. Is it important to be alone?
I think so. I think it depends what kind of life you want to live, I guess. I mean, I love this. We're just getting straight in.
Right away.
If you just want to spend your life consuming memes and short videos, then there's no need to be alone with your thoughts. Go for it. Just distract yourself until you die. But if you want to live a meaningful life and have true experiences and be present with them or for them, and if you want to truly come to understand who you are and have time to contemplate who you want to be, then you have to be alone with your thoughts. But it can be very uncomfortable. And so that's why it's so easy to run away from them. But personally, I think, uncomfortable though it is essential.
Something else that comes across your work, and the complete opposite, is how important it is to have fun. And so can you tell us a bit more, is it important to have fun?
Yes, it is important to have fun. And I can give you a bit of backstory on how I came to write The Power of Fun, which I actually think of as the sequel to How to Break Up with Your Phone, which is that because I was spending less time on my phone, I ended up with more time alone in my thoughts. And I always warn people that if you do break up with your phone, which I should clarify, I don't mean throw your phone under a bus unless you want to. I mean having a healthier relationship with it and creating better boundaries with your phone so that you can use it for the things that are useful to you or that genuinely make your life better, but you don't get sucked into these the spirals of mindless scrolling. And I was never into social media myself. I just don't care about it. But I was very into looking for decorations for our kitchen. We were doing a kitchen renovation and I was like on eBay a lot. And I was scrolling through it in the same way that other people scroll through social media. That inspired How to Break Up with Your Phone. I ended up creating better boundaries for myself. I freed up free time for myself. And I remember having this moment alone on the couch where my daughter was asleep. She was a baby then. My husband was out of the house. And I was just thinking, what do I want to do with this free time? And I mean, I spent too much time in my own head to begin with, and I don't necessarily think it's a great idea to invite other people into at least this head, but I thought, oh my God, I've lost sight of what I care about. I don't know what I want to do. And I ended up then asking myself a question I encourage your listeners to ask themselves as well, which is what's something I say I want to do, but I supposedly don't have time for? Because turned out I did have a lot of free time. I just had been spending it scrolling on my phone. Once I took that away, this existential hole opened up in front of me. So I always tell people it might get dark for a while, but you got to go through that to get out. And long story short, I ended up signing up for a guitar class because I wanted to learn how to play guitar. I play piano, and I ended up meeting this community of adults who just wanted to get together to play, not just the instrument, but just play together. And I started having this buoyant, joyful feeling, this energized feeling that was carrying me through the rest of the week. And it doesn't say good things about my mental state at that time, but I was like, what is this feeling? What is this feeling? It feels so good. And it took me a while to realize, oh, it's fun. I'm having fun. And so I got very curious about fun. So just as I wrote How to Break Up with Your Phone to solve a personal problem, I wrote The Power of Fun because I wanted more of this feeling and I wanted to understand what it was. And I came to conclude that fun is much deeper than we give it credit for. It is not just lighthearted pleasure, which is what the dictionary says. It actually is this amazing confluence of playfulness and connection and flow. And when you talk to people about their most fun memories, they will light up and they will tell you about some of the most treasured memories of their lives. So, long way of answering your question. I've come to conclude it is actually essential for a happy and well-lived life, and fun can do so much to erase differences and bring us closer to people and keep us present in the moment. But the number one thing that gets in the way of fun is distraction, and therefore, one of the biggest blockers of fun is our phones.
You talk about fun as a health intervention, I think, which is what's to describe it. I so agree. I'm also a musician, by the way. I'm a guitarist. I understand what you mean here. I think when you and a lot of people feel that it's one of these activities that kind of takes you into a state of flow in a way. You have to
Exactly.
be present and have to enjoy. Do you have any practical tips on how to have fun?
Oh, man, how to have fun. Yes, so just to explain my definition a bit more. So when I talk about it, when I give talks to audiences, I have a who doesn't love a Venn diagram? So I have a Venn diagram, meaning I've got 3 circles that I show, and they're the 3 things in the circle, they overlap, and in the center is what I call true fun. But the 3 circles are playfulness, and what I mean by that is just having a playful attitude. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be silly or, like, be a clown. That's not my personality personally at all. Like, I hate pretending. I'm not good at make believe. It just means having a lighthearted attitude and finding ways to laugh at yourself or at the world, and also not judging yourself too much, which is really hard for adults, and as we get out of childhood, just increasingly difficult. And then connection is this feeling of having a special shared experience. So, as background of how I wrote that book, I actually reached out to people on my mailing list, and I asked people to share with me 3 anecdotes from their lives in which they had, quote, "so much fun," and then I read through these, and it was amazing to see how many of those stories the details were different, obviously, but how many had these 3 elements, and especially the connection element, where even introverts told me, "I was surprised that all the stories I just told you had another person in them." So, this feeling of having a special shared experience, sometimes with dogs, but mostly with people. And then flow is the state you get into when you're totally actively engaged in whatever you're doing in the task at hand. It's when we're in the zone is the most common way we talk about it in colloquial conversation. But you can think of an athlete playing a game or a musician playing music. That's when you're totally engaged and focused. It's important to note that when you're in flow, you can lose track of time, but it's not the same as losing track of time when you're scrolling through TikTok videos. It's an active, not consumptive state to be in. And as I was saying, the biggest disruptor of flow is, well, obviously distraction. It's antithetical. And so if you're distracted, you won't be in flow and therefore won't have fun. So yes, so that's the definition of fun. And then in terms of how to have more of it, I would give 2 concrete suggestions because fun is one of those terms that's very abstract. And so if you say have more fun, it's kind of just as helpful as saying be happy. What does that mean? Great, have more fun. And fun doesn't like to be forced. We've all been in situations where a parent or a loved one is like, this is fun. And you're like, I am no longer having any fun. I hate this. And then everyone's miserable. So, 2 things. You could either try to actually figure out the things that produce this feeling for you. So I call these fun magnets, and everyone has an individual collection of like the people and the settings and the activities that tend to generate this feeling of fun. Can't be guaranteed to generate it, but are more likely than others. So, for example, one of mine, and it seems like perhaps yours, is to play music with other people. If it's not a performative setting, that's consistently a source of fun for me. Or you can figure out like my husband loves overnight camping trips. Like my daughter loves playing make believe with little plastic dogs. That's like a fun magnet for her. I love summer camps. That's a fun magnet for me. And if you can figure that out, then you actually can clear time in your schedule to make time for those activities and those settings and those people, make sure you actually see them regularly.
There's definitely for me certain people who I know are actually fun magnets for me, and I think it's really
Yeah.
personal. But I've experienced this recently. I also have a son who's 4.5.
Oh, okay.
He actually came back from school the other day, pretty recently, and started telling me about this person in his class, and started laughing immediately and saying like, "She's so much fun." But I've never seen him do that, and it feels like there's maybe a special connection with certain people that kind of like bring that in your life, and it's important to be aware of that, right? And to try to connect with these people whenever we can.
It's so important. And just as you're saying, first of all, that's a beautiful story. I love that. But that kind of laughter is a very good sign that you're having fun. And if you find yourself laughing in that way with certain people, they're guaranteed fun magnets. My husband and I just had dinner the other night with some friends we hadn't seen in a long time, and we didn't do any of the adult catch up. It wasn't like, "How was your job?" It was like, we just laughed for the whole dinner, and as we were coming home afterwards, we were thinking we really have to spend more time with them because 'cause they're definitely fun magnets for us. So, yeah, exactly, and then you make time to see those people. It can be so hard to prioritize things for yourself or let alone fun as adults. The other thing I would say is just the general idea. So that's kind of the engineered, you can put this in your schedule and you can't be guaranteed that fun will happen, but it'll be more likely because you identified the things that are worth it or likely to attract it. But you also can just try to sprinkle in more playfulness and connection and flow to your everyday life. How can you find ways to laugh? How can you find more ways to just be connected with people around you, even if it's as simple as not looking at your phone when you walk down the street and making eye contact, or when you're waiting online for something, don't look at the phone. Like, talk to the barista, make a comment, compliment the person next to you. There's all these little tiny moments for connection that float around us. There was a guy who he told me that he had had true fun, as I call it. I call that confluence true fun. He said he'd had it when he was sitting on a bench with his nephew when they were catching leaves as they fell off of a tree. And I loved that just as an anecdote, but I also said that's such a beautiful metaphor because I really think that's what fun is. There's opportunities for it floating in the air, and we just need to learn to reach out and grab them. But if you're looking down at your phone, you are gonna miss all those opportunities.
So there are people and settings and activities that are fun magnets, and it feels like the phone oftentimes is maybe the opposite, like a drain.
Yeah.
There's a pretty striking image that someone in our team actually came up with recently, um, which is that we posted on social media because we have a social media account for Opal. But it's maybe you've read Harry Potter, obviously, and there's these kind of monsters called the Dementors in Harry Potter that basically drain people's
Yes.
souls and funds out of people. And there's this kind of beautiful image of basically people being absorbed by the screen of the phone in the same way. And it feels like this is something that's resonating with people because when you're anywhere out in the world, in a subway, in a cafe, just looking around at people when they have their phone, it feels like the fun is kind of sucked out of them in a way. Would you say that's true?
I would say that's definitely true. I mean, you can feel it. I think it's interesting. There's an irony there where we turn to our phones when we're exhausted, in some ways thinking it's going to somehow relax us or refill us. But in reality, it's exactly what you say. It sucks the energy and the life out of us. And if you look around, I mean, next time you're in an airport or in a public space, just start to notice people on their phones. Or maybe don't, because you can't unsee it. This is always a warning I have. It's like seeing a family member naked. Like, you can't unsee it. So just be careful before you do this. But like, I have to turn my back if there's a family with all their phones out at a table because you just see all this energy and life and potential connection getting sucked into this rectangle. And that's not to say technology is all bad. I think that for me, I kind of think of it as, is your energy getting stuck in the phone and drained away, or are you using the phone as a tool that helps you actually create connection? So, for example, if you're using the phone to FaceTime with a relative or you're having a phone conversation with a friend you don't see often, and you're laughing and you're connected, I mean, that's a great use of technology. Or like, this feels like a great use of technology. But if you're just allowing, like you're saying, your energy to get sucked into this rectangle and then just be harvested and sold. That's what's also nuts to me. We're allowing our lives to be taken from us and sold for someone else's profit.
So you wrote a new book, which we're very excited about, where you're taking on a pretty large and important challenge of writing for kids and teenagers. And one could think that it's easier to talk about these topics with parents who are concerned and other people. And so I'm wondering, first of all, the book is called the Amazing Generation. I really love the optimism in the title, which is so rare. And I'm personally really optimistic about the next generation. I mentioned so many of the users of Opal are actually teenagers that are trying to learn a new skill to go into life. So I really share this optimism. And it feels from the title, at least, that you have an optimistic view. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that. Why the Amazing Generation?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this book. So I had written The Power of Fun and How to Break Up the Earphone for adults. And honestly, I mean, my daughter was then a baby, and I was like, oh, this is going to be an issue for her. But that seems so daunting, as you're saying, like, how do you solve childhood? That I was kind of like, oh, I really hope someone else starts to deal with that. And then well, there were a number of people working on this, but Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, came along. And really has helped to spark a global movement to reclaim childhood. And so he's got a great team working with him. It's just really inspiring. So I had teamed up with John, whom I know personally, a couple of years ago to kind of help any way I could with that movement, and ended up teaming up with him to write a children's book, which became The Amazing Generation. And the idea there is that books like The Anxious Generation serve a very important purpose, which is to get adults to talk about this issue of smartphones and social media and what it's doing to youth mental health, right? But the ultimate way to really create change is not just to have the adults talking, but it's to get kids buy-in. It's to get young people themselves to understand what's being done to all of us, maybe be wiser than us adults, honestly, because when well, I don't know how old you are, but when I got my first smartphone and when first smartphones came, it was just so optimistic. Nobody kind of put together the negative effects that all this screen time, especially social media, was.
I'm from
Yeah.
that generation as well. Very
Yeah. So
optimistic, blindly optimistic.
blindly optimistic, and we never established etiquette around where it was appropriate to use phones. We never kind of stopped to think about what role we wanted them to play in our lives. We just never stopped to think. And then you fast forward to now, and you've got a whole generation of people saying, "Oh my," who really grew up with social media in particular, saying, "My mental health has been damaged, if not destroyed, by this." So all that is to say, John and I realized, well, if you can speak to young people directly, the youngest kids are the book is for 9 to 12-year-olds, although honestly, I think it could extend older. We just had to put a category on it for the publisher. Then you can really change society, you know? So that's the goal of the book. It's to speak directly to kids and tweens, and it's to basically let them know what is being done to all of us, help them understand how do social media apps and video games and these time-sucking apps, how do they make money? They're not actually trying to help you, they're trying to profit from you. And so there's a whole section in the book about secrets tech leaders don't want you to know, but like you're saying, the ultimate goal is to give kids this optimistic vision of what their lives could be if they decide for themselves they don't want to allow their lives to be controlled by tech companies. So I'm really excited to hear that you have so many like Gen Z, young adult users of Opal. Is amazing because one of the main themes in the book is also that there is a growing rebellion of young people who have woken up and are saying, I don't want to live that way. I don't want to be controlled by tech. And one of the central parts of the book is what we call the Rebels Code, which I think will resonate with your users, but I'd actually love to hear from them, which is basically use technology as a tool. Don't let it use you, and then fill your life with real friendship, freedom, and fun. Because one reason that these products are so compelling is that the tech companies promise they're going to bring us closer with our friends and give us more freedom and independence and be really fun. But if you really think about it, the versions of friendship and freedom and fun that are offered by these apps and devices are not the real thing. It's not the true fun I was just talking about. And so the goal is to just help kids kind of understand that for themselves and choose to live a life full of the good stuff. But anyway, I love finding out about more young rebels and more young people who are doing what you're saying and are creating better boundaries for themselves using apps like Opal, like just deciding, hey, yeah, this is not how I want to live. So that's incredibly inspiring to me.
That's wonderful, and it's really unbelievably inspiring for us too to speak to you because I'll give you two stories. First one is today we're getting to about 1 million people using the app every day and really making conscious choice to change their habits, and 70% of them are either high school age or college age students. And so just to give you a sense of the size, it's really a lot of people. And the second thing is we really see a need for education beyond the app. The problem is very large and wide, and so
Mhm.
people need a lot of different things. And one of the things that we've done is we actually have a social media channel with a wonderful person named Olivia here that makes these educational videos. One of the most popular videos was about how to have hobbies. And so basically coming to, about the topic of fun also, really kind of what's the replacement? Like how do you actually kind of learn to that? And the second one is how to make friends. And so it's really not just about, changing the habits in terms of how you consume technology, but it's also people are really eager to figure out, how to actually um, create these fun magnets, I guess how you would say it. So it's super inspiring. I think this book will have a massive appeal for a lot of people. But I'm curious, how do you actually reach out to kids? Because it does seem like a very large challenge, and oftentimes it feels like conversations between adults and teenagers and kids are full of conflict on that topic. It's hard to get across. So I'm curious how you do it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, that's wonderful to hear about the videos you guys are doing because I think that really taps into something very important for anyone listening is that, yeah, if you take away some phone time, as we were talking about before, you will end up with this empty space. And so it's so important to figure out how to fill that and also to realize or to really think that if you cut back on phone time, it's not just arbitrary restriction. It's not just to cut back on phone time to cut back on phone time. It's so that you have more time to live your life. It's so that you have more time for friendships and to develop these hobbies. And that just makes me so excited. And just as a resource for college age students listening to this podcast, there's a young man named Sean Killingsworth who started a movement called Reconnect, which is a network of clubs on college campuses where young people get together and deliberately put down their phones for an hour or two and do something fun together. And so they actually develop real life friendships and new hobbies. And anyway, it's amazing. But Reconnect is a really cool resource. But anyway, how do you speak to young people? This is a great question. You'd have to talk to my daughter about whether I'm successful at this in a general, everyday sense. But basically, the way we went about the book is I used to be a middle school teacher, and I know that if you talk down to kids, they don't listen. I mean, any parent knows that. The best conversations are when you're on an equal playing field, or even better, when the adult is slightly in a less powerful position and the kid can feel like, oh, I've got one up on the adults. I mean, not in like a classroom discipline kind of way, but just in the sense of when you're trying to convey information. If you are genuinely curious about something your kid knows, they get engaged. And so the way we went about it was to basically think, okay, well, what works in terms of communicating with kids, making them feel like they're the experts, making them feel like they're in on information that other people don't know, especially the adults in their life, and then also giving them the skills that they would need to have a lot of fun. I mean, telling a kid actually what you really should be prioritizing is having more fun and being more free and independent and spending more time with your friends. Like that's a pretty compelling message for anyone, but especially kids who are used to being told, do your homework, and these responsible scoldy kind of things. So we went about the book by developing it along those lines, but then also doing a focus group with kids across the country that Penguin Random House, the publisher, helped put together and actually ran these kind of concepts by. We also realized it's a tricky age range. We were trying to target kids who were on the cusp of getting smartphones and social media. It is still relevant even if someone already has those things, but there really is this sweet spot of kids who are just going through this transition. And if you can get their buy-in to the idea that they should delay getting smartphones and they should delay getting social media, that's a huge win. And so the book is actually designed to work on 3 levels so that you can because a 4th grader, which is roughly 9 years old, is gonna be very different, obviously, from a 7th grader. So there's a graphic novel component in it done by this fantastic illustrator, Cynthia Yuan Cheng, who did one of the Babysitters Club books. That if you just read the graphic novel, you'll get something out of it. We also did interviews with a lot of young people, these young rebels, and got anecdotes and quotes and actual little profiles from people between like 15 and 25 years old who've gone through this and have reflections they want to share with younger people, advice they wish they'd known. So we kind of have profiles of rebels and little quote bubbles and lots of try this activities so that you can be really engaged. So if you just look at the graphic novel and that stuff, great. And then if you're someone who actually reads the text that John and I worked extremely hard on writing, even better, you'll get more out of the book. But it was anyway, to answer your question, it was a real challenge to figure out not just how do you talk with 2 kids, but how do you address this particular age range? But I'm super excited about how it turned out, and we're starting to incorporate it, like starting to do experiments with some classrooms with real kids and asking them, "How would you use this book in a classroom?" And I'm so excited to hear what they say and then get to spread that to, more classrooms around the country and the world.
As you were meeting with kids writing the book, is there something that stood out that you discovered that you were surprised about?
Yeah, there were a lot of things that were surprising me. And one thing is actually the result of a Harris poll that John and his colleague Zach Roush did about a year ago, which was actually surveying people 18 to 27 years old and asking them if there were any apps they wish didn't exist. And I believe it was 43% said Snapchat. It was nearly half said Twitter X. And then a huge number of kids also said TikTok. Obviously, kids are not on or Twitter as much or X as much, but two of the main ones that kids spend time on, the average American teenager is spending something like 5 hours a day on social media. So the fact that they're spending that much of their lives on something they wish didn't exist, I think really reflects the fact that young people feel trapped by these things. They actually don't want to be living this way. Like you're saying, like the people who are using Opal, they know they want to make a change, but they feel trapped. And so to me, that was like, wow. And also the fact that a lot of tech leaders don't let their own kids use their products, that tends to be very eye-opening for kids. And we had kids in the focus group say, Well, I remember one of them said, "I thought that these companies were out to do good things for me, but now I think they're just trying to make money." And I had no idea that people regretted using it. I thought that older kids and young adults, like, loved these things because 'cause they're always on them.
That's powerful. Um, I've been asked a few times to speak to high schools, and one of the things I found was interesting was actually talking about the business model, like you're saying, like
Mm.
trying to actually like make sense of this, attention economy business model, which is can get complicated. High schoolers, have, I guess, it's a different audience, but I always find it very powerful when they actually get it.
How do you explain it? It took me so long to write the paragraph about the attention economy, I can't even, like, that was, like, such torture. So, yeah, how did you do it? Tell me.
I try to ask them a question first, which is, how many of you use TikTok? How many of you use Instagram? Right? And they raise their hands. And the second question I ask is, how many of you pay for this product? And, no one raised their hands, right? And then I try to actually ask them to imagine to say, hey, like, how do you think these companies make money? And so some people will come up with ads and, try to understand a little bit. Um, and then I just simply remark that businesses are there to make money. And so they have to make money in one way. And then I try to explain what the attention economy is and how it works, and that essentially they are the products. The products that they use are not the products. They're simply the vehicles being able to distribute the product, which is themselves to advertisers on the other hand. And I think that's easier for high schoolers definitely than for kids that are 10. But uh, I think for a lot of people, this is an eye-opening moment, and they actually, usually really want to learn about this stuff, but no one's told them.
It is really interesting that once people internalize it, I think that that's when the change starts to happen. But I also think adults just underestimate how self-aware younger people are around this issue, I mean, in general, but around this issue in particular. And that's shown by the fact that you're saying you have such a such a large user base who are younger people. It's that Gen Z and Gen Alpha, like the younger generations now, they kinda get it. And if they don't get it, they're eager to learn about it, which is really heartening. I mean, one of the things that makes me the most optimistic is that there's been such a movement to get phones out of schools, and that's happened so quickly in the past 2 years. I believe it's now 40 states have some kind of legislation about phone-free school day. Ideally, it should be full day, bell to bell, including recess and lunch, because those are 2 of the main times to socialize and develop friendships, but some kind of phone-free legislation is, like, amazing. And when I think about it, I'm like, what is gonna happen when we start to have a generation of people who have gone through a school system of 13 years where it's just expected that you don't have your phone nearby, that you put your phone away when you're trying to concentrate or be with your friends. That's an entire cultural shift that will translate into the workplace when they're older. I mean, right now, adults are so guilty of constantly checking their phones in the middle of a work meeting. And I've heard someone refer to, older people who it's just funny. They can be very scoldy towards kids, but they're like, the 70, 80-year-olds, they're on their phones all the time. I heard someone refer to them as, screen your citizens, which made me laugh. But, it goes to show, like, a lot of the older people, we kinda get that there's something going on, but we are not very self-reflective of our own habits, but the younger generations actually are, and we could get to a world where it just becomes ridiculous to imagine having your phone out at a work meeting or when you're trying to get work done.
And the generation before us, that were smoking on planes, and in restaurants, right? So, I guess the habits will evolve in that way. We actually, by the way, on the school side, have recently been pretty involved because what's happened is because we have so many high schoolers using the app, and a lot of schools try to figure out how to actually implement these phone policies.
Mm.
We've had schools reach out to us to partner and basically use Opal as a way of implementing a phone policy. And so we built a product called Opal for Schools, which is now available in a number of high schools in the US, and growing rapidly, where
Oh.
essentially the kids are keeping their phone, but all the banned apps are blocked when they check in the morning, and then they get access to it after. But what's interesting is it doesn't actually stop when the bell rings, because they keep the app. And so they're basically learning these habits outside of school as well. And what we find, which is interesting, is they're also using the app on weekends. They're also basically putting in their own limits and restrictions, which is really what I think makes sense. So that you're taking a behavior you're learning at school and you're kind of bringing it outside of school as well. Um, but so,
Yeah.
and I know there's plenty of solutions out there, and it's been really inspiring to see so many so much innovation going on in that. But schools are really kind of trying to figure out what is the right approach, with different kind of approaches here to teach this topic.
Oh, sorry, no, I was just gonna ask you, do you guys have anything that works on school laptops? Because that seems like the big next frontier is ed tech, which is like, why did we give kindergartners iPads? But I know so many schools are struggling with the fact that they use, for example, YouTube for some things, but then
Right.
kids are just watching videos and not social. So is there Opal for school
Yes,
laptops?
there is. Yeah, Opal works. Opal for schools works on the phones, on so Android and iPhone, on iPads, and on Mac devices so far. So, and we've had schools that basically implemented across the board. So we've run into this specific issue as well. And clearly, I think there is a space for technology, in school, and many schools have adopted it in a positive way. It's more a matter of, what's good and what's bad, and making sure that you can understand, what's good screen time, bad screen time within the school context. And so, I think that's going to happen for sure. It's probably going to sound crazy to look back and think that at one point people had access to everything all the time, whether they were, sitting at school on their sofa at 2 a.m. in the evening, at home, or with friends. That's probably going to be a thing of the past.
Oh, God, I hope so. I mean, I think that's the thing when you actually really think about how like, if you came into this fresh, like Jean Twenge, the generational researcher who wrote iGen, and she became very well known, especially after writing a 2017 article in The Atlantic called "Have Smartphones Destroyed a Generation?" Although she points out she didn't write that headline, but anyway, she just came out with a new book that I recommend called 10 Rules for Raising Kids in a High-Tech World, and one of her statements in the beginning of this book is just to imagine like, what if your 10-year-old came up to you and said, "I'd like you to spend $1,000 to buy this device for me that then will cost you $40 a month forever for me to keep having, and I'm going to start spending all my time just staring at my hand and not interacting with anybody, and I'll be able to contact anyone in the world, including strangers." You'd be like, "Maybe not a good idea." Or then she says, "What if your 12-year-old is like, I want to get this app so that I can put myself in a skimpy bikini and take 200 pictures of myself in it and then post it online for the world to see and judge." You'd be like, that's not a good idea, but that's Instagram, So I think it's useful to kind of take a step back and just describe what we're doing. And then you're like, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. You have a device in your pocket or your school computer can do all of these things at once, and you're saying it's for quote learning. No, it doesn't actually make any logical sense. I'm a science reporter and health reporter by background, so I'm very into randomized controlled studies. My book before these two was Vitamania, the one that's above my head. There's a history of vitamins and supplements, and I have type 1 diabetes. I'm very into medical stuff, and I would never recommend anyone take any kind of pill if there hadn't been, excuse me, a randomized controlled trial behind it showing safety and efficacy. But in the case of phones and social media, I feel like this is actually something where you can trust your gut a bit more. And if you're like, when you give a kid a phone, then they start spending all their time on their phone. They drop all their hobbies. They start to interact with their friends on their phone. And I lose my child. Like, maybe you don't need a randomized controlled trial to then consider making a change. Or the same thing for yourself. If you feel like you're exhausted and depleted and that you're spending too much time on your phone and you're at all curious about, is that really a problem? You don't need to wait for the results of this trial. You can just, cut back on your screen time, fill it with more fun, use Opal, do experiment on yourself. And if you feel better, that's the answer that you need. And so I think societally, we need to also just tap into our common sense. Does this look good? What's happening right now? Does it look like this is going well? If it doesn't, we can change. We don't need to wait for the academics to get. There's no way you'd ever do a randomized controlled trial about smartphones or social media, because if you think something's harmful to a group of people, you can't do an experiment making them do it. It would be like, I'm sorry, I just got on a little tangent, but I think it's really interesting to realize there's never been a randomized controlled trial showing that smoking causes lung cancer. Because you can't do that. You couldn't be like, we think this causes lung cancer. So this group of people, you're going to smoke a pack a day for the next 15 years. We're going to see what happens. You can't get that past a ethics board. We're never going to have those trials. We just need to go on what we know as human beings. And these things are sucking our humanity away.
Let's talk about parents. What is the role of parents?
Well, the role of parents is much bigger than it should be when it comes to this, because we have basically no regulation over social media or any of these apps that are damaging our children. I mean, we haven't even gotten to like AI chatbots and the relationships with AIs and driving kids to death by suicide. I mean, it's just there should be more regulation around this, but there's not. And so a lot of this is falling to parents, which is not fair, but that is just how it is, at least for now in the United States. And so I think that there is a lot of responsibility that comes to parents and that we parents need to take this seriously. We need to take it as seriously as any other aspect of our children's health, if not more so, because this is such a tricky subject. So I would say one thing that's very important is for parents to model the behaviors they want their kids to have from a young age. You can't tell your kid to not check a phone or device at the dinner table or to be present in conversation if you're not doing that. And they've seen you from the time they're a baby constantly with your phone in your hand or checking sports scores under the table or whatever you're doing. So I'm not saying that to guilt or shame any parents, but if you're listening to this right now, like do take a look in the mirror. And that's part of the reason I wrote How to Break Up with Your Phone is to create this non-judgmental uh, approach to just creating better habits for yourself so that in part you can model them for your family. But I'd also say that if you're in the position of having a young child where you haven't yet introduced a lot of screens, let alone a smartphone, great. There's actually a clear path forward, and it's not as difficult as we make it out to be. We just need to get other people to join us, and there are a lot of people who want to join you. And what I would say there is to delay screens for as long as possible in general. Like, there's no reason a 2-year-old needs to have an iPad. If you are going to do any screen time with your young kids, do it with them and on your device, not don't give them a device. Keep screens out of the bedrooms for sure. When your kid becomes old enough that they're starting to do stuff out of the house and you feel like you need to have a way to communicate with them, say you want to send them to the store for groceries or to pick up something, which is a great idea, by the way. We should be giving our kids more independence and freedom in the real world because that's actually far safer than the online world, which is really important for parents to wrap their minds around. It's like, we're so worried about the predators at the playground. They're not at the playground anymore. They're on Snapchat. Why leave the house? You can just go on Snapchat and find lots of kids. So we should be much more cautious about online stuff. But give them like a loaner phone, like a flip phone that is not theirs, or a phone that has Opal installed and everything's blocked except for the phone, and then have them give it back to you when they're done. When they get a little bit older and it's time for them to actually have some kind of maybe they're regularly going to sports practices, or you want them to have more independence regularly out of the house and feel it would be better for them to have a phone, get them a smartphone alternative. There's a whole crop of companies that have smartphone alternatives or basic phones, which are basically phones that don't have access to the whole internet or social media, but they have a variety of approaches towards how many other things you can download. So it can kind of be like the internet with training wheels. And along the way, I'd really recommend talking to your kids about your philosophical approach to technology because it is a philosophical approach. You might not be like all the families, but that's okay. Like if your family's vegetarian, there's plenty of people who eat meat. You still stick to that principle in your family. So if your philosophy is that screens for kids is not what you want to be doing and you want to be prioritizing real life, that's your family philosophy. You need to stand firm with that because it's something you believe in. And then when you do get your kid a smartphone, if you get them a smartphone, which hopefully is not till high school, if not later, then that's when you really do need to take the time as a parent to set up parental controls, install an app like Opal, go through the work of making sure that it is as safe as possible. And that's not overprotection at all. It's not, it's just necessary. If you start, if you start as I have to like give talks to people about the dangers of the internet, it gets real dark real fast. And your kids can find stuff that they cannot unsee by accident on their phones. Predators and creepy people can reach out to them through a lot of these apps, including things you might think are safe, like Roblox, not safe at all. So parents do need to wake up, but there's a variety of different levels of parental controls and app blockers you can do, even to the degree of having your home router program to go off at a certain time at night. And we parents need to look into it. And it makes me actually furious that it's not easier to do this natively in things like the iPhone. So I'm very grateful for companies like Opal because if you wanna read I don't know what the word is. It's hilarious, but in a dark way. Jean Twenge, the woman I mentioned earlier, recently did an article in the Washington Post about trying to set up parental controls on an Apple device. She's an expert. She spent, like, decades, like, she could not figure out how to do it. So anyway, that's what I would say. The roadmap to summarize that is delay as long as possible. Make your kid's first phone be just a loaner phone that doesn't belong to them. Then get them a basic phone, and then only after that, after they start high school, if not later, smartphone. But you have to do parental controls, and you have to do that if they have earlier. If you've enter any internet, sorry, if you have any internet enabled device in your house, you need to set up parental controls.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I think like it's one of those problems where it feels like it's such a huge problem that it can be overwhelming for parents to try to act. And also, like you mentioned, the guilt part. I think the guilt is very powerful, but in the wrong way, because it can also cause like people not to act. And we see this a lot with the app as well. We try to work a lot on being guilt free, being fun, being okay with people relapsing and those kind of things, because we see, of course, guilt be as a negative to behavior change, because you essentially will reject that at one point. And I think for parents, it's pretty common. Actually, we published an article, also like an op-ed yesterday, on the topic of um, warning labels. We purchased a billboard in New York, which is still up in Lower Manhattan, that says one thing, which says "scrolling kills," and it's basically a smoking label, that we cigarette label that we changed, not smoking but scrolling. And
Yeah.
we published an op-ed on this topic, and I received a message yesterday following the op-ed from a parent that was quite interesting, but also I think very telling. Where it's a parent of teenagers, and he says, screen time is a constant background negotiation. Phone downstairs at night, no devices on the table. How much is reasonable time for someone to spend daily on passively consuming nonsense short video? And I think he basically was thanking me to say it's good to hear it from someone else and to hear other
Yeah.
examples of people that are talking about this, so you can, as a parent, not say, this is my opinion, but maybe here's something, someone else saying this that has authority, or maybe here's a book, like what you're
Yes.
doing.
Yes.
I guess that's helpful also, in
Yeah, I probably should have said, yes, you should also read, The Amazing Generation along with your child, because that is the right, and I think a lot of parents will have their eyes open too, because a lot of adults they haven't fully internalized or understood or ever learned the idea that the reason these apps are free is that you're being sold. But I love the fact that you did that billboard. I'd love it if you could send me a picture of that, because 'cause I'd like to share it, because it's true, and obviously that it goes back. I mean, I was so grateful for former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, who's actually, as many people may know, he wrote an op-ed arguing that social media apps should come with a warning label because of their effects on young people's mental health.
Do you think warning labels are part of the solution?
I don't know that warning labels would change behavior, but I think it would normalize the idea that this is a health risk. Like, I don't know, how many people who are addicted to smoking are like, "Oh, whoa, now I see the Surgeon General's warning. I'm gonna put this pack away." But that gives an institutional stamp on the idea that this is bad, and I think that that's really useful in general, just to get society to kind of associate with that. No, that's a health risk. Like, smoking is bad. If you choose to smoke, it's one thing, but we all know it's bad for you. No smoker's like, "Nah, it's probably fine." Um, I think it's incredibly useful in the context of parents, though, because it's very difficult. I think it's getting easier, and so I am optimistic about this, but it has been extremely difficult for parents to feel like they're alone in not letting their kids have access to social media and smartphones when it seems like all their other friends have them. But although I will say, not all the other kids have them. I'm amazed by how many kids claim to be the only one without these things. It's like, that's actually that's not true, but it makes it so much easier for parents to say no to their kids if they can point to something like a Surgeon General warning. I mean, if a kid's like, "I wanna smoke cigarettes," then the parent's gonna be like, "No, you can't do that. Everyone knows that's bad for you. It's literally on the carton." It just helps us uh, gain have the gumption to stand up for what we know is right. Hopefully, it won't be necessary after a while, and I also do think, as we've been talking about, it's really important to focus on the positive too. You What I always say to parents is that it's totally developmentally appropriate for kids to wanna have more independence from you and more time with their friends and have more fun. That's totally appropriate. The issue right now is they don't have the opportunities to do it in person, and so where do they turn? They turn to phones and screens because they can't do it in person anymore, which is actually really very sad if you think about it. But what I say is that, okay, well, recognize that these are natural things that actually are good for them and appropriate, but figure out ways to help them have more, as we say in the book, friendship, freedom, and fun in person. So that could be making your house a more fun place to hang out in for your kids. I have one friend who she got like gym equipment off of Craigslist, and she set up kind of this weight situation in their basement or their garage. And now all these teenage boys come and like pump iron after school, and they just hang out together. She's created a place for them. That's one idea. Or just there's another group in is it Washington Heights? It's called Tweens Without Screens, and it's a group of parents who started a WhatsApp group where they help their tweens have more opportunities for real life hangouts and just doing stuff together. Or I've recently become a big fan of the idea of getting your kid a landline. landline in heavy quotation marks, is it doesn't have to connect to any kind of line, but, a wireless phone that works over the internet connection, so it's really cheap or free. Just a traditional, it looks like the phones of our youth. And then you can say, "All right, well, no, you can't have a smartphone, and you can't, if you're gonna use any kind of tablet or computer, it has to be in a public space in the house," which is very important. There should not be any of these screens in bedrooms. But you can go talk on the phone to your friend in your bedroom. You can have the privacy you want to just have a phone conversation with this friend. That's where I think we need to kinda take a step back as parents and be like, "Oh, wait, yeah, it's not like we're trying to make our children's lives miserable. It's just we're recognizing that this one category has been very damaging," going back to what we're saying, should have a warning label, but there's all these other opportunities that have worked for all of humanity. We used to be able to figure this out, and we were in a much better mental state before, we were spending so much time on screens and social media apps in particular. And again, let alone AI chatbots. Please, people, children should not have relationships with AI chatbots or toys, please. If this comes up over the holidays, do not buy your children a toy that has an AI chatbot in it.
Loud and clear. Catherine Price, thank you so much for your motivation, your enthusiasm, your optimism, all these wonderful tips and thoughts and experiences, both for kids and parents. It's been wonderful talking to you. So, The Amazing Generation, when is it coming out?
The Amazing Generation comes out December 30th. How to Break Up Your Phone and The Power of Fun are already out. And I have courses for both of those if anyone wants to do it. It's like a text message-based course where you actually get coached through a phone breakup. You can find that at katherineprice.com. And I'd love to have people from your community join my newsletter. I have a Substack newsletter called How to Feel Alive, and I write about all the kind of stuff we're talking about, but it really is like how to feel alive. It's very much, again, me trying to solve my own problems, but I feel like, your community, we're probably pretty like-minded. And also, I'm just so grateful for what you're doing.
Really appreciate it. It's the feeling is mutual, and we'll definitely share all this information in the notes. I think, yeah, the problem is very big. We need to kind of uh, group together, have education, have content, have books, have um, perhaps there's a role for regulation and for better products. And I'm really glad to have met and to have had this wonderful conversation with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.